step into the bizarre and often stomach-churning world of medieval living practices. From peculiar hygiene rituals to downright gross dietary habits, the Middle Ages were rife with strange customs that will leave you equal parts fascinated and repulsed. Join us as we delve deep into the murky waters of medieval life, uncovering the unusual, the grotesque, and the downright unusual practices that defined daily existence in this tumultuous era. Medieval showers were a far cry from the modern spa experience. Imagine standing under a bucket while someone threw cold water at you. This rudimentary method was the closest thing to a shower, often leaving people feeling less than refreshed. It was a bracing and brief ordeal. Public baths were a communal affair, making privacy a rare luxury. Sharing bathwater with strangers was the norm, which meant you never knew what or who you'd encounter. These public baths were social hubs, where people gathered not just to clean, but to catch up on the latest gossip. Fleas and lice were so ubiquitous that they became an accepted part of daily life. People considered these pests as normal as wearing a hat or shoes. Their presence was a constant, itchy reminder of the era's lack of personal hygiene and the limited options for pest control. Bedpans were regularly emptied out of windows, creating a hazardous walk for anyone below. This practice turned streets into minefields of human waste, adding an extra layer of caution to one's daily routine. Watch your step took on a very literal and unpleasant meaning in medieval towns. Rats were an all-too-common sight, often treated as unofficial pets in medieval households. Unlike today's domesticated animals, these rodents roamed freely, contributing to the overall squalor. Their presence was tolerated, if not entirely welcomed, as they scavenged for food and added to the general mess. In medieval times, chamber pots were a common household item. These pots were often emptied directly into the rivers, contaminating the very water people used for drinking and cooking. This practice contributed to widespread diseases and made clean water a rare and precious resource in medieval communities. Toothbrushes were a luxury, so most people resorted to using twigs or chewing on herbs to clean their teeth. This rudimentary dental practice did little to prevent tooth decay, leading to widespread dental issues. The lack of proper oral hygiene contributed to the prevalence of toothless smiles. Human waste was often repurposed as fertilizer in medieval gardens. While this practice was an efficient way to enrich the soil, it also posed significant health risks. The use of human waste in agriculture meant that food crops were often contaminated, leading to frequent outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. Medieval streets were notorious for their dual function as open sewers. Waste of all kinds, from human excrement to animal carcasses, littered the pathways. This created a hazardous environment for anyone navigating the streets, turning a simple walk into an obstacle course of filth and disease. Animal butchery was a common sight on medieval streets, with blood and offal often left to rot where they fell. The smell of decaying meat permeated the air, adding to the already foul odors from the open sewers. This unhygienic practice attracted vermin and further degraded the living conditions. In medieval times, laundry was a communal activity, often done in streams or tubs filled with water. The same water was frequently reused for bathing, resulting in a less than hygienic situation. Cleanliness was more about removing visible dirt than eliminating unseen germs, which were not yet understood. Windows were typically covered with animal hides to keep out drafts, but this solution brought its own problems. The hides often retained the natural odor of the animal, making indoor air less than pleasant. This method provided insulation, but did little to improve the overall living conditions. Drafty homes were a common issue, and one makeshift solution was to stuff gaps with straw. While this helped block the cold air, it created a new set of problems. The straw attracted insects and small animals, adding to the already challenging living environment and contributing to the spread of pests. Tooth decay was widespread due to a lack of proper dental care and a diet high in sugars and starches. People often ended up with few or no teeth by middle age. Toothless smiles became a common sight, adding to the overall rugged appearance of the medieval population. Wooden shoes were popular among medieval folk for their durability and affordability. However, these shoes offered little protection against the ever-present mud and muck. Walking through streets filled with waste and debris was a daily ordeal, making footwear more of a necessity than a comfort. Meat preservation in medieval times relied heavily on salting, a process that could significantly alter the taste and texture of the food. This method allowed people to store meat for longer periods, but fresh became a subjective term. Salted meat was a staple, often masking the true age of the product. Bathing was infrequent due to the belief that it posed health risks, leading most people to bathe only once a year, if at all. This infrequency contributed to widespread body odor and skin issues. Cleanliness was not prioritized, making personal hygiene a rare indulgence rather than a regular practice. Ali was considered safer to drink than water, leading to its widespread consumption among all ages, including children. The brewing process killed off harmful bacteria, making ale a more reliable option. As a result, mild inebriation was a common state, subtly influencing daily life and interactions. Homes were heated by open fires, which, while providing necessary warmth, also filled living spaces with soot and smoke. This created a constant layer of grime on surfaces and in the air. Despite these drawbacks, open fires were essential for cooking and heating, integral to medieval domestic life. Medieval mattresses were rudimentary at best, often consisting of straw, hay, or, for the fortunate, a sack stuffed with wool. These materials offered minimal comfort and attracted pests. Sleeping conditions were far from ideal, with itchy bedding and limited support, contributing to restless nights and discomfort. In medieval times, waste disposal was a rudimentary affair. People would simply toss their refuse into the streets. This practice relied on the hope that rain would wash away the mess. Streets were often clogged with debris and waste, creating an environment that was both unsanitary and unpleasant. Toothpaste in the medieval era was a far cry from modern formulations. A common mixture included ash and honey, a combination that sounds more like a culinary mistake than dental care. This abrasive concoction did little to prevent tooth decay and often resulted in more harm than good. Medieval houses, with their thatched roofs, provided a cozy home not just for people, but also for various insects and rodents. These roofs, made of straw and reeds, were perfect hiding spots for pests. The presence of these unwanted guests added another layer of discomfort to daily life. When nature called, medieval people often turned to moss for their hygienic needs. This natural material served as a primitive form of toilet paper. While it was readily available, it certainly lacked the convenience and sanitation of modern alternatives, making personal hygiene a persistent challenge. Clothing in medieval times was rarely washed. People would often layer new garments over dirty ones, creating a buildup of grime and odor. The infrequent washing of clothes contributed to the overall lack of hygiene, making personal cleanliness a luxury rather than a standard practice. When someone passed away in medieval times, burials happened swiftly, often within a day. Without modern embalming techniques, the deceased were frequently interred in their own backyard or a nearby plot. This practice not only conserved space in crowded towns, but also helped prevent the spread of disease. Pigs roamed freely through medieval towns and cities, serving as both scavengers and waste disposal units. These animals would eat almost anything, including human refuse, which partially helped clean the streets. However, their presence added to the already messy and unsanitary conditions, contributing to the cycle of filth. In the cramped living conditions of medieval homes, the idea of personal space was a luxury few could afford. Families lived in close quarters, often sharing sleeping areas and even beds. This lack of privacy extended outside the home as well, with bustling markets and narrow streets making solitude almost impossible. Flooding was a common issue in medieval homes, especially those built near rivers or on low ground. When water invaded these simple structures, residents had little choice but to adapt. Muddy floors became a part of daily life, adding to the already challenging living conditions and the constant battle against grime. Soap was a rare commodity, often too expensive for the average person. As a result, most medieval people skipped it altogether, relying on water alone for cleaning. The absence of soap contributed to the pervasive dirt and unpleasant odors of the time, making personal hygiene a difficult and often neglected task. Nighttime chamber pot use was a communal experience in medieval households, where families often shared a single pot. This nightly ritual fostered a unique form of family bonding, albeit over rather unpleasant circumstances. Privacy was a luxury few could afford, making this intimate inconvenience just another part of everyday life. Medieval diets relied heavily on bread, making it a staple at every meal. Hygiene, however, was often neglected, with infrequent bathing and hand-washing. The lack of cleanliness contributed to the spread of diseases, turning something as simple as eating into a risky endeavor. Yet, bread remained a comforting constant. Skin diseases were widespread, with treatments involving peculiar ingredients like goose fat. These ointments were applied in hopes of relief, though their effectiveness was questionable. The prevalence of these ailments highlighted the harsh living conditions, where proper hygiene and medical knowledge were sorely lacking, leaving many to suffer in discomfort. Navigating medieval streets was an adventure fraught with obstacles. Waste, wandering animals, and thick mud created a hazardous path. Each step required careful attention to avoid slipping or stepping into something unpleasant. The streets were a reflection of the unsanitary conditions of the time, making even short journeys a challenge. Water sources in medieval times were often contaminated, posing a constant threat to health. Drinking water carried the risk of illness, making every sip a gamble. The lack of clean water underscored the dire public health situation, where many fell ill simply due to the necessity of hydration. Getting sick in medieval times was often a gamble with your life. Treatments included bloodletting, where doctors drained your blood to balance your humors, or applying leeches to suck out the bad blood. These practices often did more harm than good, leading to infections and further complications. Rotting meat was a common aroma in medieval towns, given the lack of refrigeration. Meat was often preserved with salt, but once it spoiled, the smell lingered in the air. Markets and homes alike were plagued by this stench, making daily life a sensory challenge for everyone. Medieval dental hygiene was practically non-existent, resulting in rampant tooth decay. Without proper care, people's breath often became a weapon in itself. Toothless smiles were common, and chewing on herbs or using twigs for cleaning did little to combat the overwhelming oral health issues. Beds were often shared with family members or strangers when traveling, making personal space a luxury. Inns crammed as many people into one room as possible, and even homes had limited sleeping arrangements. Privacy was scarce, and intimacy with strangers became an unavoidable part of life. Medieval beauty routines were a far cry from today's standards. Women used lead-based makeup to achieve a pale complexion, often at the cost of their health. Dirt masks were another common beauty treatment, highlighting the stark contrast between medieval and modern approaches to personal care.